should we get rid of race? I mean, should we just say, listen, racial distinctions aren't real, they don't exist, so let's just get rid of them all? That's a discussion that I listened to John Mcwhorter and Glenn Loury today. I found their responses interesting. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Escape from the Echo Chamber. I'm your host, Aaron Comey. Now, this discussion didn't start with just them. And in fact, it was referencing Kamel Foster. Kamel Foster is, he's in a similar space as they are. And he says, I don't consider myself black. It's not a distinction I accept. And so they were talking about this. And I found because I thought it was going to be a rather pedantic, discussion around the issue. And maybe because, that's less of a description of who they are, and more of just a description of what I'm seeing so much of and what is so prevalent at this time. So there is, in what I describe as, a lot of anti-blackness from black faces, and it's being heavily rewarded in the certain spaces, the internet, political spaces. It's like there's a movement amongst non-black people to recruit black people to bash black people. To borrow a phrase from Larry Sharpe, black man bad. So yeah, Brandon Tatum is not the only person engaging in black man bad. And I was just having a brief discussion today about a couple of other people who are showing up in the internet space, not Glenn Loury and not John Mcwhorter, but who seem to be jumping on that same bandwagon and benefiting quite handsomely from it. So that's I wanted to preface that is as to why I was expecting something different, because and they're two different people, they're two individuals, and I've seen John Mcwhorter seems to be I see him somewhat differently than I do see Glenn Loury, but nonetheless and it was interesting. I see them in two different lights, but I was surprised by both of their answers. Mcwhorter says that while he admires Kamel Foster's position and he considers it a noble one, he is not he says it's a smart decision. It's a smart position. It's a noble decision, but it's not one that he makes for pragmatic reasons. He says he wants to be heard. And he feels that if he were to say, I'm not black. I don't consider myself black. Don't consider me black. And if he said it like that, or if he said, I have white blood as well. So, like if he was to voice these and embrace that position, he feels that people would now dismiss him and not hear him. And in certain segments of society, that's true. Actually, and I think in different segments of the society would treat it differently for different reasons. For instance, if he just said, I'm not black, I think there's a segment of the population that would be cool with that. Like, okay, cool. But now the question is, my question for him would be, do you think that segment of the population, even if they were willing to accept that you were like not considering yourself black, you were a racial abolitionist, would they, even if expressing support for race abolition, would they operate with race abolition? So my question is, if they then saw two black people at a restaurant just wilding out and fighting each other, tossing stuff around, would they say, look at these Americans, or look at these human beings just being so destructive? Or would they say, look at these black people? Would they say, wow, look at this black on black crime? When are these people going to get their act together? Like, they need to get fathers in the home. That's my question. Do you truly believe that even if you made the decision, even if there were people that supported you, and let's say from the conservative space, white conservatives, white small L, white libertarian leaning or whatever people that said white people on the right, if they embraced that decision from you, do you think, and they said, hey, we not only do we embrace you doing it, we agree we should get rid of race, we should just ignore race, would they actually ignore race when it came time to talk about negative things? Would they still hold that position? Because there's a bunch of people who claim to be colorblind, and yet they still keep talking about black on black crime. That's a clear observation that I've seen. They claim, oh no, that just I'm colorblind. I don't see color. I don't pay attention. That's not important to me. Oh yeah, what are we gonna do about all this black on black crime? Well, what about Chicago? They got so much black on black crime. Now you never hear these people utter the words white on white crime, but when it comes to negative activity and black people, these colorblind people suddenly see color. But let's go on to an additional point. John Mcwhorter then talks about how, in Europe, they see him as American, not as black. But there are black people in America who would look at him and say, well, no, they still look at you as just, and use the N-word. And I know that there are black people who would say that. My question is, because he says but that's not the case. So he may have had that experience, and he may be right that most are. I do know, and once again, and that's why I'm saying he may actually be right overall. I'm not living in Germany. I don't spend time in Germany or England or Sweden or any number of these places in Europe. So my observations is from an outsider. I see what I see on TV, what certain individuals choose to show me from TV. But there are figures that are rising there that seem to have a same that this anti-black sentiment that people here have, and they ally with one another. And so I'm curious as to how have you considered that, or how widespread is that? Are those movements very widespread, or are they very localized, very small, and even if they're visibly very small, do you truly believe, beneath the surface, there's not a large number of these types of people who have an intense hatred, animosity, and disdain for black people? If John Mcwhorter identified as, hey, I have white ancestry, so I'm white, would we go back to those same people? If we go back to those people who were saying that, yeah, we don't think you should have to identify as black, and then you tell these people, white conservatives on the right, white conservatives or white libertarians, white people on the right, if you said, okay, yeah, well, I have a significant amount of white heritage or ancestry, so I'm white. How would they feel about that? Would they could say, oh yeah, okay, cool, you're all right, brother? Or would they be like, yeah, like, no, but you have black blood too, right? Yeah. Would they have the same willingness to embrace you embracing your whiteness? Nonetheless, I say all this to say, I find it interesting, John Mcwhorter's position, and I feel that as a black person, I shouldn't demonize you. I shouldn't demonize you or anybody else who decides, yeah, I don't want to identify as black. I shouldn't demonize you. And if you feel comfortable, and I wish we were in a position where you would still be heard regardless of whether or not you wanted to embrace blackness or not. I mean, but of course it depends on what you're talking about. But like if you're just talking about, because if you decide to go on a tour about about doing outreach for black people and doing outreach to black people, but you're saying, oh yes, I'm not black, that would kind of be counterproductive. But I'm saying in terms of just as an intellectual, if you were going around giving providing content, that wasn't tied into that, I don't see why you shouldn't be heard, and I wish we existed in a place where you could be heard, even if you made those personal choices. But it does bring me to what Glenn Loury said. He says that, despite race being so small and subtle a difference biologically, that he disagrees somewhat with Kamel Foster's. It's not that he doesn't think he didn't really criticize Kamel Foster, but he said it didn't really, like, its impact is, and he used the word quixotic. So yeah, because if everybody says, okay, race exists, if everybody's dealing with race exists, and then one person stands up and say, okay, race doesn't exist, and everyone just goes, haha, funny, and they just continue to carry on and do what they're doing, like, okay, so for you made a personal decision not to identify racially, but everybody else, it's because it could be a social construct, but everyone else is still treating it as such, treating it as something that exists. Therefore, it exists because it is, and by convention, it exists by how they behave, how people deal with each other, with one another, and how people use these classifications for many things. Some positive, some negative. That society will still continue to recognize race. So one person divesting of racial classification doesn't change the fact that the rest of society, especially in the American society, continues to operate as if race exists. So yeah, and I get that. That made a very a whole lot of sense. And there was something else that Glenn Loury said. He mentioned about how many individuals who, when acknowledging this construct, they look at blackness as so black individuals who will look at other people as treating them differently because of their blackness. But he's saying, even if that's not true, them believing it to be true tends to alter their behavior in a way where now they are receiving a certain type of treatment that, it now becomes true. And that's an interesting point, because, and I'm going to tie that point into the next thing that John Mcwhorter said, because he talked about how he would like to ask Kamel Foster, if the opinion, if the way blacks were treated, were viewed, was a more positive viewpoint, would he still be willing to divest? And he was touching on something which is a point that I have in response to something he said earlier. But it's that if it wasn't that big a deal, if it was just a club, if there wasn't a significant amount of stigma from whatever source attached to blackness, would Kamel Foster still be like, yeah, I don't identify as black, I don't consider myself black? Or would he then be more willing to embrace it? But that's when I say that there are people who embrace blackness but attribute negativity to it, and that's the problem. The problem isn't the embrace of blackness, in my opinion. The problem is the negativity they attribute to it. And there are black people who do this. There are black people who look at negative behavior and attribute it to blackness, and it's like, okay, you're perpetuating and validating stereotypes that are harmful to black people individually, collectively, as a whole. Like it's very harmful, because if you're acting like the person that gets, if you're acting like violence is a black trait, like that's bad. Like if that's what you're embracing, and there are some people who've explicitly said it, and they are, yeah, they want to disassociate. So if you choose to disassociate from blackness, and that's what you consider blackness, it makes sense. It makes sense to some degree. But what doesn't make sense is attributing all of this negative behavior, whether you embrace blackness or don't. it doesn't make any sense to attribute such negativity to blackness, and it shows like a lack of vision, a lack of a very limited scope of reality. But that's what so that's why I would tie in my response to both Glenn Loury and to John Mcwhorter in terms of, yes, there are people who may look at, okay, this person's looking at me negatively. And even if they don't personally feel that black people are like this, they may feel that everybody else looks at them that way. And that's still a negative thing. Because I may say, I know there's a lot of racist people. I'm going to operate as, I'm going to keep it in my mind that this person could be racist. I'm going to treat them on the level though. I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to but I'm not going to act with hostility, because I'm not going to bring about a situation, a negative interaction that might not otherwise occur had I just dealt with this person in a cordial manner. So oftentimes, and a lot of times, this is a defense mechanism, because people feel they're going to be rejected, so they start with behaving in a way that, well, I don't care about you anyway. I don't want your approval, because they're trying to protect their feelings, their emotion. And I think it's a matter of, me personally, I'm of the mind of, I really don't care. Like if a person is racist, okay, be racist. My goal is to make sure you don't have the power to do anything with that racism. So whether it's in like, let's say this person who's a government official. So now that person may be racist. Now my goal is to make sure I have a way around whatever power they have, so that they may have power. They may have the ability to impact my life, but I'm working, what my mind is working on is how to counter any negative impact they can have on my life and work around that. So I keep in mind that they may be racist. I can still deal with them as if I don't think they are, or I don't know they are, until they give me ample reason to know so. And even then, I may continue to treat them as if I don't notice. But I will make appropriate steps to make sure that they cannot negatively impact my life, or whatever their plans are not, any obstacles they put in front of me, I can still overcome and get past. So it's not even the racism that I need to get past. It's the effect of what that racism is doing, or is attempting to do to me, that I need to get past. But I want to point out at least one other thing. It's a point when, because John Mcwhorter said he thinks that Kamel Foster's position is noble and brave. And I tend not to look at that decision, because this isn't the first time I've seen people like want to distance themselves from blackness. And in my experience, it doesn't seem to be a brave decision when made. So I'm not specifically just talking about Kamel Foster. I do have that opinion also in regards to Kamel Foster, because that's my first observation. My first observation is that generally this does not come from a place of bravery. My first opinion, and it goes to something he said, but he didn't really, he started to go down that path. I don't know if he saw where the path actually, but John Mcwhorter started to touch on this. He started to touch on this in terms of, if black people are viewed negatively and, are just so often reviled by others. Me saying, well, I'm not black, is that an act of bravery or an act of cowardice? Because think about it. You actually had here in American society black people who did pretend to be white. And people who would say they wanted to completely hide any blackness they had because they wanted to pass. Why? Because of negative treatment that they would get from being black. So if there is still negative treatment that comes from being black, saying, well, yeah, I don't identify as black, I'm not black, because I've seen people who have expressed hatred and have expressed dislike, explicitly expressed dislike, and through their actions, in my opinion, express hatred towards black people, who are like do that to try to distance themselves from blackness, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's these aren't acts of bravery, these are acts of cowardice. These are people that see the negative opinions that people have about black people, negative treatment that people have towards black people, and in order to try to forestall being subject to certain behaviors, certain treatment, certain viewpoints, they say, well, I'm not black. And now if you're doing this and allowing people to denigrate, and that's a perfect word, to denigrate black people, that would suggest that that's what you're doing. It's an act of cowardice. You just don't want to be amongst the group that is being demeaned, that is being, disrespected. You want to be accepted. So by choosing to distance yourself from blackness, you're trying to be accepted by non-black people. And I don't, like I said, this is just my initial opinion of the subject, but is it fair to paint that, paint Kamel Foster with that light? You see, here's the thing. I remember seeing him, and I'm trying to remember where it was he said it. I think it was on Bill Maher show. I think it might have been someplace else. In fact, I think it was someplace else. I think it was someplace other than Bill Maher show, where he said, I'm not black. I don't consider myself black. I do, I find it. He said something along the lines of it's like an arbitrary distinction, or no, it's an artificial distinction. It's an artificial, and he says I'm American, and I'm like, wait a minute, like, there's not the lines on the map are made up. Like, there's not, like, that's an artificial. It's a man-made. That's what he said. Man-made distinction. It's a man-made, yes. And I'm like, yeah, well, America is man-made. There's no actual lines on a map that identify America. But you choose to embrace being an American, which is a man-made distinction, but yet you choose to distance yourself from blackness. And so it is a statement and viewpoints like that tend to make me think this is an act of bravery. Nor do I think it's an act of just, enlightenment, because once again, if we want to talk about artificial distinctions, he's not just saying I'm just human, because that would be more enlightened than saying I'm American. These distinctions between national borders, like I'm part of this club, I'm part of this group because I was born in this country or whatever. Like, what? Like, that seems less enlightened to me than accepting a racial distinction. But here's the main reason why I personally, there's a couple of main reasons, but here are the main reasons why I personally accept being a black person, a black man. One, I don't see it as a negative. Two, I know that there are negative connotations. I embrace the positive connotations, and I act accordingly. I know that if I look at the limited scope that they want me to view blackness in, that's what I will see. But I don't. I look further. I look beyond the shores of America. I look beyond 1776. I look beyond 1619. I look beyond that, and I know that, okay, yes, there's so much potential for greatness, for achievement. There's unlimited potential that I, as a black man, and that other black people have as well. I refuse to allow myself to be limited to looking at myself as having been a slave and then now I'm free. No, I refuse that, because that's just not factually accurate. But additionally, and it touches onto what Glenn Loury was talking about. If I say I'm not black, if I say, oh, these are artificial distinctions, and I like la la la, and I'm walking around, it doesn't change several different things, several aspects of this society. One, it doesn't change the state of black people in this country. So that's black men, black women, and most importantly, black children. It doesn't change the state of black children in this country. and I see and I acknowledge, it's my belief, and it's my belief and my acknowledgement of that belief and of what I believe to be reality, that this is not by accident, that the suffering that Black people are facing is not by accident, is not just a happenstance, and needs to be addressed. And so that's why I, as a Black man, embrace Blackness, because I want to help Black people get past the injustices, the crimes against humanity that have been inflicted upon Black people for being Black. And then that touches on the other thing. Even if I divest, even if I tell myself that I'm not Black, that doesn't erase racism. That doesn't change the fact that there's still a bunch of people that hate Black people. And we can sit here and say, oh, it's a post-racial society, or racism is so far diminished. When? Because Mcwhorter made the comment about, since, 1966 or something like that. And I'm like, really? Because if I ask a libertarian, if I ask this question to libertarians, what does laws do? Do laws change society? Do laws eliminate, like the drug laws? Did the drug laws eliminate drug use? Or did they just create a black market? And then the question I would ask is, did the Civil Rights Act of 64 end racism? Or did it just create a black market? Because I like the question that Jonathan Blank's asks. He said, hey, libertarians, when did racism end? If you feel racism is just so insignificant now, when did it end? Do you really believe that the government passed a law and suddenly everybody said, you know what? I'm not racist anymore. Or did people just start hiding it a lot better? When you have racial sensitivity training in police departments, is it changing people's hearts and minds? Or is it just changing their behavior so that their behavior is not so blatantly and overtly racist? You've got teenagers, like I was just seeing, critical race theory they're talking about critical race theory, and in Texas, I forgot the name of the town, but it's supposed to be like a real ritzy town, real affluent town, and they elected people who ran, I guess, on we're not with critical race theory, and this was a town where high school students were on video, like just using the N-word repeatedly. And I'm like, these are high school students. They were not alive in 1966. They weren't alive in 2000. But racism is dead. You've got whole new generations that are virulently racist, virulently anti-black. But racism is dead? You see, I'm not a fool. So it doesn't matter how much people say, oh yes, we're post-racial. I can pay attention, I can observe, I can see, and I can know that for hundreds of years, at the very least, for hundreds of years, there has been a crusade against black people. And what I'm seeing today gives me every reason to believe that that crusade is still being carried out by many people. I'm not going to delude myself that I am not black, because they sure don't believe that I am not black. And so if an individual wants to believe they're not black, Godspeed. I do not wish harm on you. But be aware, if you're wrong about the existence of racism, if you feel racism no longer exists, whether you consider yourself black or not, whether you consider yourself just on par and peers with other people, there are people that consider you subhuman and worthy of all kinds of harm, maybe death. And like I said, I do not wish harm upon you. But there are bad people out there who hate black people. I remain acutely and I remain completely aware of that fact. And I will not attempt to convince myself otherwise. As always, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, like, share, subscribe. If you want to see more content, because I talk about black issues, like that part about, trying to help black children, I truly believe in that. And I'm trying to do things in terms of this channel and in the real world. The channel this is information that goes out there. But if you want to hear more about things that I'm doing, that I think we should be doing, that that other people are doing to help uplift the Black community, feel free to subscribe. If you disagree with what I've said, if you think, oh, you're just a racist, you're a Black supremacist, feel free to give me a thumbs down. But like I say, don't just give me a thumbs down and run and hide. If you're going to give me a thumbs down, say why in the comment section, and I will address it either in the comment section or in a future video. I'll see you next time.